just outspeed and get a KO there, and so there's a lot of risk and reward to bringing it.
Well, if you're just tuning in, Pokemon Trainers, this is the final Swiss round of day one, Justin versus Ko, and out on the field, front and center, it's going to be a Miraidon apiece for both of these trainers, but Justin has paired it up with that Grimmsnarl for some potential screen support, whereas Ko has gone for the fake-out potential of the Iron Hands.
Both players with their most instant offense, the choice specs Miraidon out on the field, and both players with some way to mitigate that. Ko threatening a fake out into the Miraidon on Justin's side, and Justin threatening a light screen to mitigate the damage from the Miraidon on the other side. Now, whenever you see two Miraidons up against each other on the field, you immediately start thinking about the Terastallization and the move choice, because both have to be fearing a Draco Meteor from the other side, but then also thinking about the Terastallization for themselves. Both have the Fairy Terastallization, and so could become immune to Draco Meteor. Of course, both also have the choice specs, so whatever move they lock into quickly, it will be what they're stuck using. You know, you may be tempted to just Volt Switch and get out of there, or even just directly switch so that you don't worry about the speed tie, but definitely a volatile position to have these two here that could end up with very crucial resources spent straight away. But no, just a raw switch here, Miraidon coming out, Justin not wanting to commit to this position and just getting Volcarona out on the field.
Yeah, does not want to tolerate those mind games that can go through. Fake out was going down into that slot, however, instead it goes into the Volcarona. No retaliation, however, there. Grimmsnarl able to go for the light screen, set up its special defense on the field in the face of this Electro Drift that Ko has gone for with his own Miraidon. That's going to target straight down to the Volcarona. That is a solid KO against it. Justin not happy to see that, but the Flame Body at least activates as a little bit of revenge, but I think Justin would have loved to have seen that go down into the Iron Hands.
Yeah, if you were going to get one Flame Body activation, you would have rather had it in the other spot, but you can see the high cost that Justin paid for kind of opting out of that Miraidon versus Miraidon. Ko opted into it, just went ahead and went for the Electro Drift, whether that's calling a switch, calling a faster Volt Switch that leads to another Pokemon on the field, or calling a Fairy Terastallization. You don't have to pick which one you're calling, you just put an Electro Drift into that spot and capitalize on it with a quick KO onto Volcarona at a very low cost back. That light screen was going to go up eventually regardless, and the burn onto Miraidon probably won't be that impactful. Dodging the burn onto Iron Hands, pretty important though. I'm sure Justin expected Fake Out to go in there and was just thinking, if I can get the Fake Out in there, get a burn onto Iron Hands, that's a big swing in my favor instead.
Yeah, it would have been great momentum for him for sure. And as you mentioned, you know, being pinned in with the potential fake out, it was a little bit of a detrimental spot for Miraidon. He would have been forced to commit to that Terastallization. So being able to switch it out, yes, you then preserve your Terastallization for later on, but as you can see, it was a little bit devastating for Volcarona.
Not good for Volcarona, but now Justin knows what Ko's Miraidon is locked into, knows that his Miraidon is safe on the field as an electric and dragon type, doesn't have to worry about the other side, but Ko does still have to worry about what Justin's Miraidon will lock into, so it goes ahead and uses this Terastallization, becomes a fairy type, gets away from both Draco Meteor and super effective Spirit Break damage.
Yeah, Justin feels free to commit to that Terastallization and lock in the Dazzling Gleam. That's going to be able to do a huge amount of damage to the opposing Miraidon, but not enough to get the KO, as it is also a Choice Specs variant. It's going to be locked in to that Electro Drift, connects down into Grimmsnarl, but again, Grimmsnarl able to hang on. Justin breathes a sigh of relief in that moment because Grimmsnarl is now able to go for the Spirit Break, get the knockout on the Iron Hands, and remove that Pokemon from play. But the Miraidon on Ko's side still hanging on.
Got a bit of ahead of myself there, saw Miraidon turning into a fairy type, but there were two Miraidons on the field. It was Justin using the Terastallization to get extra damage onto that Dazzling Gleam, damage that meant it eventually picks up both KOs there, with the burn picking up the extra bit of chip and the Spirit Break helping to get the KO onto Iron Hands, and knows that Ko was very unlikely to actually put an Electro Drift into Miraidon on that turn since it was sitting there as a Dragon and Electric type. And so now Justin loses one Pokemon on the first turn, but takes two KOs on the second turn, takes the Pokemon lead in this matchup, and ends with a Miraidon behind Light Screen, locked into Dazzling Gleam, and offering pretty good damage against this team.
I think Volcarona actually put in a bit more work than we gave it credit for there. That Flame Body giving the burn to the Miraidon, you know, being able to get that bit of chip meant that restricted went down, and now Ko is down to the last two remaining Pokemon. And it is a good dog-cat duo here. You've got the Chimpao with that Zamazenta Dauntless Shield activating.
Another interesting position. Miraidon locked into Dazzling Gleam means the Zamazenta on the other side has a very easy wide guard, but you may not be making very much progress if you do that. Just a wide guard and an attack in on a switch might not be as fast as you want. You have to imagine Justin is highly prioritizing Reflect here, hasn't gone up yet, and has two physical attackers left on the other side, as Ko's only two Pokemon. So easy to go for that this turn, but then it's what does Miraidon do? Does it stay in and go for Dazzling Gleams to force Zamazenta's hand, or does it just switch out and know that wide guard is such an easy play? And then do you thread the needle correct? Do you guess whether the wide guard is coming out or not?
These mind games are so critical at this point. You can see Justin observing that team sheet, really double-checking his information. As you mentioned, he commits into that Reflect. It's now up in the face of both these physical attackers. And Miraidon free to go for the Dazzling Gleam. The Zamazenta does not take the bait, does not go for the wide guard. That's a big amount of damage into that Chien Pao, taking it right down to its Focus Slash, leaving it incredibly vulnerable in these next couple of turns. It's now time for Ko to retaliate, though. The Icicle Crash will connect into Grimmsnarl, get the knockout, and Zamazenta now in a position to try and get some good damage onto this Fairy-type Miraidon. It's going to be going for the body press, however. There is no Grimmsnarl for it to go into, so a little bit of damage into Miraidon, but that's still significant chip.
You have to imagine expecting a switch. It is Iron Hands ultimately in the back for Justin. So had it been an expected wide guard, and so Miraidon switching out to Iron Hands instead, then Body Press is much better damage than a Heavy Slam is. But the guess is wrong. Miraidon does stay in a Dazzling Gleam, but now there's not so many 50-50s involved. Because you took the KO on Grimmsnarl, Miraidon does not have this option to switch anymore. It only has the option to Dazzling Gleam, means wide guard's easy, but just because you can wide guard doesn't mean you can win. The Chien Pao on the other side, down to 1 HP, cannot deal with the Iron Hands by itself, so it's very difficult to see how Ko, through Reflect, tries to get through these Pokemon. Ultimately, getting to the right wide guard position was too late, where now it seems like Iron Hands is just set up to cleanly win this game.
I think this is a really safe protect as well. You know that the fake out potential can come through on the Iron Hands and that would be able to get the KO, but Justin doesn't go for it. Dazzling Gleam comes through again, Ko not going for the wide guard. I think knowing Chien Pao is safe this time, the Zamazenta can take another one of these Dazzling Gleams and so then can retaliate effectively. And as you can see, that body press comes through into the Iron Hands. But Iron Hands still free to play here, can get that low kick down onto the vulnerable Zamazenta and calls to protect beautifully.
Gets the KO onto Zamazenta, and ultimately Chien Pao, with only single targeting attacks and both Pokemon threatening a KO back at it, has no way to win this game. Justin just had the right piece at the end. You can see how little that body press did into Iron Hands. Even a double up with Chien Pao wouldn't have been enough to pick up that KO, and that would have just left Miraidon free to win the game had that been the option. So Iron Hands, just the right piece, the right bulk at the end to kind of close this out after a bunch of fairly even early trading.
And some brave plays from Justin, just constantly going for those Dazzling Gleams. I know in this situation with just the two Pokemon, he didn't have the choice, but in that previous turn, there could have been that wide guard potential, but instead he just committed to the offensive plays, was able to get the necessary damage on the board to put Ko onto the back foot, and it's really enabled him this winning position.
The thing with wide guard is that it requires your opponent to miss a turn to go for that wide guard. So Justin recognizes that even if the wide guard comes out, Chien Pao's not going to win that game on its own, and if Chien Pao tries to do anything to make forward progress, Iron Hands can just pick up the KO on Chien Pao and lock it up. So a lot of times while wide guard might block one option from your opponent, the cost is just as high to you. If you spin both spin to turn, just kind of negating each other, then it's about what those remaining Pokemon next to the two, you know, the one being wide guard and the one using wide guard, can actually accomplish. In that situation, Iron Hands had the distinct advantage against Chien Pao.
I mean, long story short, you've got to do damage to get the knockouts, right? And if you're constantly going for these wide guards, then you're not getting that offensive pressure on the board. Volcarona was only there for a hot minute, but it still put in a significant amount of work, preserving that Miraidon, but critically getting the burn onto the opposing Miraidon here. Because the Dazzling Gleam wasn't enough to get the KO after this Electric Drift at the end of the turn, it did go down. But this Electric Drift definitely did a huge chunk of damage into the Grimmsnarl, but Justin has got a good relationship with those Pokemon. It was able to hang on for its trainer, retaliate here, and get the knockout on the Iron Hands. I think would have been difficult for Justin to have to work around.
Right, I think losing the Iron Hands early, which seems like it's going to be an important Pokemon in this match, and getting the better end of what move Miraidon was locked into, where Dazzling Gleam had a much higher impact and kind of generic impact against the Pokemon on the other side than Electro Drift did, gave Justin the advantage. Part of that was some pretty bold, predictions of what was going to happen, being willing to walk into Dazzling Gleam. There was no Terrestrialization on the other side to resist it from either Pokemon.
That's true.
And just get the damage and to leave Miraidon somewhat vulnerable. I think Ko took just as many risks, though. Also left Miraidon out on the field turn 1 unterrestrialized, left it out on the field unterrestrialized turn 2, threatened by Dazzling Gleam and Draco Meteor. And so Justin managed to maybe play a little bit safer and get the better ends of those trades without having to guess anything right. And so I think Ko probably, that means, needs a different gameplay, a different approach, because you're not going to have things swing that much back in your favor.
You do have to make those bold plays sometimes, and I think we saw Ko go for those quite a lot in this match. Just Justin was still able to glean the advantage and take that game, but there's definitely some adaptations that could be made. But we're jumping straight back into game 2 here. It's going to be the Zamazenta and the Chien Pao coming out for Justin, completely shaking things up from game 1, but the Iron Hands and the Miraidon coming out for Ko.
a full switch here, the same Iron Hands and Miraidon from the other side, but now we have the physical attackers, the Zamazenta and the Qian Pao from Justin's side. A little bit of a delicate position here. The Qian Pao would love to go out on the offensive against Miraidon, but has to worry about fake out. So you'd probably expect a double protect through this turn, just because it burns the fake out. You learn what Miraidon is locked into. That might give Ko the opportunity to readjust the position to what he likes. The Iron Hands looks very comfortable here, but the Miraidon maybe a little bit less so. Has to worry about an Icicle Crash coming in. That said, we talked before the match that one of the best ways to deal with Zamazenta in this relative mirror matchup is to get a big electric attack on it.
Yeah.
And so having to flee with Miraidon in the face of Zamazenta is a pretty effective use of the Qian Pao.
It's a good way to apply pressure for sure, but the first Pokemon fleeing the battlefield in this game too is going to be the Iron Hands. Instead, Ko switching up the ball position to bring his own Zamazenta onto the field, allowing Dauntless Shield to activate and give it that boost. Qian Pao on Justin's side just playing defensively. Justin, I think, sussing out how he feels about this particular turn as the Zamazenta also protects. So Justin may be scouting out how Ko wanted to adjust this ball position going into the next couple of turns, and also looking at what this Miraidon is locking into. Turns out to be the Dazzling Gleam.
Well, we're back into a similar position, but with the script flip.
Exactly.
We have now the Miraidon on Ko's side locked into Dazzling Gleam with the threat of Wide Guard on this side, but once again, a position where just Wide Guarding to negate both Pokemon probably isn't to your advantage. Qian Pao does not want to have to be fighting by itself against Zamazenta. Now, you can't allow an Icicle Crash into Miraidon too easily. It might force the Terastallization out, or maybe just force the switch from the Miraidon on the other side, just because Qian Pao is threatening there even without the Wide Guard option. And then two Zamazentas up against each other. They can both do really significant damage with Body Press. It can come down to speed advantage. Zamazenta's often not trained to be its maximum speed, and so one player may have the natural speed advantage here.
Well, adaptations on Justin's side. Once again, we see him switch out a Pokemon for that Volcarona, but there's going to be the adaptation on Ko's side as well. Miraidon leaving itself into the back, does not want to risk those Dazzling Gleams in the face of a Wide Guard, and switches things up and brings Qian Pao in. So one Qian Pao leaves, one Qian Pao joins. Body Press is going to come through, though, into Zamazenta. That is a huge damage. That is a one-hit KO with a critical hit. Justin looks up to the sky. That is not what he wanted to see, as he loses the restricted by the opposing one on Ko's side. Now forced to have to bring in a Pokemon from the back.
One of the most crushing things that can possibly happen in a Zamazenta matchup. You either find out that your opponent is naturally faster, or that just won the speed tie, and then he gets the critical hit Body Press to simply take Zamazenta off the field for Justin before it can attack. Really devastating. You have to imagine that beyond that, Justin was expecting and hoping the Body Press might be into the Qian Pao slot, and so you'd get to resist it with Volcarona, get a roll of Flame Body, but it all goes wrong. Instead of the Body Press goes into Zamazenta, gets the critical hit, and just gets the KO there. A very crucial piece for Justin taken off the field. It immediately makes things like the Qian Pao so much more threatening because you don't have the Zamazenta to resist it.
I mean, that Zamazenta was not messing around on Ko's side, right? Just was able to get that solid one-hit KO.
Solid one-hit KO, quick knockout, and now both players have revealed all 4 Pokemon as well after Ko shows the Qian Pao and Justin shows the Volcarona on that previous turn. So no Iron Hands this time from Justin after it was the decisive Pokemon of the game, and also no Grimmsnarl after the screens had a pretty high impact. So really showing a willingness to switch after a win going into game 2.
Well, Miraidon just trying to bring the Qian Pao right down to its Focus Sash again, leave it vulnerable maybe for that Volcarona to try and clean it up and remove it from the field, but this also does enable Justin to have a pivot with that Miraidon. It can leave the field, you can bring the Qian Pao in of your very own, and again, this Pokemon is running that Focus Sash. It has that little bit more flexibility on the field to take a big hit of damage, and it's going to have to take the Icicle Crash. Won't be a huge amount of damage, but critically that Focus Sash is now broken, leaving it vulnerable to a follow-up from this Heavy Slam, and that will be a knockout.
Yeah, an easy play for Ko to make. He's seen what 4 Pokemon Justin has, knows the Miraidon cannot protect itself. So if you put an Ice move and a Heavy Slam there, if the Miraidon turns into a Fairy type, it goes down. If you go to Qian Pao, it goes down. And so a safe KO. Now it is traded back. The Volt Switch goes into Qian Pao, and then a Flamethrower into Qian Pao picks up that one. And we're continuing to simplify the game, but Ko already ahead because of that crucial crit Body Press earlier. You're happy to trade down a Pokemon, get rid of the Qian Pao on one side in exchange for the Qian Pao on your own side, and get this down to just Miraidon's Volcarona and Iron Hands. Volcarona, I think, is the key piece now for Justin, though. It's the one that can still threaten Zamazenta quite well, and can be very bulky against Zamazenta, has to watch out, and same for Iron Hands, but has to watch out for a big Electro Drift from the Miraidon. We saw that in game 1, just picked up a KO into Volcarona.
I mean, that was definitely a rough turn if you were a Qian Pao, both of them going down and leaving the field, but Ko able to now bring in the Iron Hands from the back, that we're able to see out in the lead as Miraidon joins on Justin's side. These are Justin's 2 last remaining Pokemon, and as you mentioned, Volcarona in a position where it can potentially do some damage out there, but is there potentially still Terastallization in play?
Still Terrestrialization in play, not that much electric terrain left either, but Ko keeps them right on in the back to be able to reset it in the future. And right now, Miraidon's going to have to lock into one move for the rest of this game. And Ko's going to keep that flexibility later on.
Well, the Sparkles are coming to the stage here at NAIC as the Miraidon is going to commit to that Terrestrialization. It will turn itself into a Fairy type. I think this is going to have to be more for a defensive capability, but at the same time, you can try and go for the Dazzling Beams, but there is that potential wide guard in play that you have to watch out for. Fake Out comes through, so Miraidon still gets to think about what move it wants to lock into in the next turn, but as Zamazenta is in a position where it can go for that body press, still a significant amount of damage despite not being very effective, and Volcarona can utilize this opportunity where it was not targeted to go for the Quiver Dance, but is it going to be enough to carry Justin through this game?
It's absolutely going to be an uphill battle, but it starts there, getting the Quiver Dance that both amplifies the damage, tries to get the speed up over Miraidon, and makes you take less from Miraidon's damage. Maybe you can get there. And that's what we talked about, where Volcarona has to play this role where because the distraction is taken away from it, it gets a chance to boost. Miraidon pays a high cost there. Ko playing very straightforward, understands, just puts a body press there, forces the Terrestrialization out, and now has the play to go for damage into the Miraidon, either with Wild Charge or Heavy Slam. We've already seen the wide guard, so probably a heavy Wild Charge coming through in the future.
Well, the Flamethrower followed by the Draco Meteor targeting down into this Iron Hands. Despite the fact that it has that Assault Vest, it is going to go down to the double up from these special attackers. The Zamazenta doing no damage, instead going for the wide guard. But the critical thing is we now know what that Miraidon is locked into. It cannot switch out to reset those drops.
Right, cannot switch out to reset those drops. Also locked into Draco Meteor. Miraidon on Ko's side still free to use Terrestrialization to become a Fairy type and permanently immune to those Draco Meteors, making it all about Volcarona. But Volcarona is making progress. The cost to becoming a Fairy type with Miraidon on the other side is that you would then be neutral to Flamethrower. Maybe 2 Flamethrowers at +1 is just enough to pick up this KO. Zamazenta going to have a very hard time dealing with Volcarona on the other side, can't do much damage to it, and has to worry about burns. And so there's definitely still a path here, especially if Justin can get one more big, Draco Meteor onto the Miraidon on the other side, either forcing the Terrestrialization or probably just picking up the KO if Ko doesn't immediately opt to Terrestrialize like this.
Well, the Terrestrialization is going to come through, and it is indeed onto that Miraidon, making sure that it's going to be immune to the potential Draco Meteor that the opposing Miraidon can deal out. But Justin could easily see this, could maybe just try and go for some chip down into that opposing Zamazenta. But Volcarona moving first, goes for that Flamethrower into the opposing Zamazenta. It's going to go down to another one, but Miraidon trying to get the edge, is able to get the knockout. So teamwork is the dream work here for Justin, removing that restricted from the field, but it still has to contend with the Miraidon on the opposing side. You cannot hit it with the Draco Meteor. So as you said, all eyes come down onto this Volcarona. Electric Drift is the choice. It goes down to Volcarona. Ko, knowing that that's the Pokemon that can stand in his way, does a huge amount of damage, but I don't know if Volcarona has the capabilities to knock out the opposing Miraidon before it can KO it in the next turn.
Right, it doesn't look like it should be able to. That Electro Drift did so much. If it was closer to missing the 2 at KO, where you might try to get a Struggle Bug out there, or just get a couple turns of leftovers recovery, there might be a path. But with Electro Drift doing that much, you're going to basically need Flamethrower to just one-hit KO Miraidon on the other side. I don't expect that should be possible. So Justin making a valiant effort out of it, calling the wide guard and getting the KO into Iron Hands, calling the Terrestrialization and getting the KO into Zamazenta before it moves, but ultimately just doesn't have the firepower. It doesn't look like. Let's see the Flamethrower.
Oh, not even nearly enough. It's, I think, going to have needed 3 of those. Miraidon trying to go for the Draco Meteor, but we know that it's not going to be doing any damage. On the contrary, however, the Electric Drift can come through from the Miraidon, KO that Volcarona, and as Justin cannot do any damage in retaliation, it looks like we're going to be going to a Game 3, Len.
Going to a Game 3. I think the decisive moment of that Game 2 was the critical hit from one Zamazenta to the other. I think after that, Ko executed very well to just simplify, like very safe moves and simplify down from there. Made a surefire KO into a Miraidon slot that it resulted in the Jianpao trade. Used wide guard to make sure nothing too bad happened while just trading down into this position where Miraidon could easily close it out. Of course, not actually showing over in the game yet. We have to see an Electro Drift land into the Miraidon, but making it happen using the staying power of the Miraidon and the sheer firepower of Ko's Miraidon.
I like the way, though, Justin's taking every second of this turn, knowing the game is over, but really starting to think towards Game 3. Electro Drift will, of course, come through from Ko's Miraidon here into the opposing one to be able to seal up the game and even the score. But Justin, from Game 1 into Game 2, really shook things up with the team, instead led with these kind of physical, offensive Pokemon, and now maybe you've got to go into Game 3 and shake things up again.
Yeah, you have to wonder, because So Justin used both of his restricted Pokemon in both game 1 and 2, but made a 100% swap. It's completely changed from one set of 2 non-restricted Pokemon to the other set of 2 non-restricted Pokemon. Now going into game 3, do you go back to what won for you? Do you expect that your opponent will expect you to go back to what won for you? So you stay with this? This was very close despite the critical hit. Maybe if that critical hit doesn't happen, Justin can fight through it. But also it seemed like Grimmsnarl and Iron Hands were really impactful in this matchup. Do you want to leave them back again? Or what kind of mixed option is there with using one from each set? It's what Justin's thinking. That's why he takes the time to take the full time and click a Draco Meteor into a Fairy-type Miraidon on the other side to try to decide what the best path is for this very important game 3.
And I think both our trainers here utilized their 2 Pokemon to target down one opposing one to guarantee a lot of knockouts. We saw that on both sides, from the Chien-Pao and from the Iron Hands as well. So both times they could identify which Pokemon was their biggest threat, found a way to eliminate it, but the issue is there's always that partner Pokemon that can either use the opportunity to set up or be able to get some critical damage on the board.
Right. The lack of protects on both sides as players bring, the Assault Vest on Iron Hands, the Choice Specs on the Miraidon, the Grimmsnarl that doesn't have protections. There's a lot of opportunities here to just force a KO. I mean, that's what Miraidon wants to do. It has such sheer firepower that it always wants to be looking for a KO, not just kind of repositioning and pivoting. And so once you get ahead in a matchup like that, it's very easy to force your KO, even though you might take one back and you're not playing safe, and just extend a lead. And so it really feels like the lead matchup can be so important to this. Game 1, it was a pretty neutral lead matchup. Justin opted out of it, sacrificed the Volcarona, and then turned it into a pretty positive lead matchup once he'd seen what the Miraidon on the other side was locked into. But in game 2, it felt more like a positive matchup for Ko that Justin had a harder time ever, finding his way, his footing back into.
I mean, you mentioned this earlier about the commitment, particularly with the Miraidon. Like, you have to commit not only to the move choice because of the choice specs, but also the terrestrialization. And when you have a Miraidon mirror, those Draco Meteor buttons are so tempting to hit, which means you are basically forcing your opponent, if they call it, to go for that terrestrialization. But wake up, trainers. Game 3 here in Swiss Round 8. It looks like Justin is running it back from game 1 in a way with the Miraidon, but we've got the Iron Hands out on the field, but Ko switching things up now in game 3. Chien-Pao Zamazenta.
Yeah, Justin taking a page out of Ko's book and getting the Iron Hands Miraidon on the field, turn 1 for the first time in this match for himself. Meanwhile, Ko makes the big adjustment that Justin did in game 2 to have Zamazenta and Chien-Pao out. In the same way that worked out fairly well for Ko in game 2, it might work well for Justin in game 3, but still has all of the volatility that we described in game 2. That Chien-Pao still threatening a bunch of damage from Miraidon, but has to worry about a fake out on the other slot. It has to be very tempting for Ko to simply double protect and get rid of that fake out. But Justin can then make the same kind of adjustment into a double protect that Ko made in game 2. They've just flipped sides of the field in a matchup that already feels like a mirror match. And so they'll both also have learned what the other player values out of it from what they did in game 2. What they think is the biggest threat is what they played into in game 2, and then maybe that means that's what they're going to go out for in game 3. But for now, just a protect coming out from Chien-Pao.
The psychology is fascinating. You could see the protect come through from the Chien-Pao, but not on the Zamazenta. The fake out was going down into that slot, so not going to be able to slow down a Pokemon here.
That leaves room with no protect there for a massive Volt Switch into Zamazenta. That is a ton of damage.
Yeah, particularly with the Electric Train in play, you can really boost that up with your Hadron engine and do a significant chunk of damage, as well as pivot out your Miraidon, keep it safe in the back, and bring that Volcarona back onto the field to shake things up. Body Press comes down into that slot though, does over 50% of damage, and no Flame Body activation there.
No Flame Body activation, but leftovers means that it's still not a 2-hit KO. Chien-Pao might be able to close that KO itself with Crunch, but again, would risk a very devastating Flame Body because it both breaks your Focus Sash and mitigates your damage. And Justin may be showing why he has the better version of this, because in the face of the risk of double protect and the reposition, actually gets a better target for the reposition. Volcarona more impactful against these 2 Pokemon than what Ko was able to reposition into.
But we've seen Volcarona, particularly when Justin's able to set it up, do some decent damage into both these opposing types. So possibly Volcarona is a threat that Ko has to be cognizant of, but at the same time, you don't want to let that Iron Hands run rampant with something like a Drain Punch. Looks like it's going to be the target straight away from the Icicle Crash, followed up by the Body Press. That is going to be able to get the knockout, so you don't have to contend with any fighting type moves coming through from that Pokemon. Both the Pokemon on Ko's side breathe a sigh of relief as Volcarona follows up with the Flamethrower. Now this will take down to the Focus Sash of that Chien-Pao, leaving it a lot more vulnerable going forward, but I feel like Ko was able to remove a significant KO on Justin's side.
Yeah, it felt like a very significant KO. Ko has enough damage there with the Sword of Ruin to get the KO into Iron Hands. And if that Iron Hands had been able to hang on and get a Drain Punch into either of these targets, then that turn looks very different. But getting the KO there, and partly because there's no threat of Rage Powder, the Volcarona on this side has the Quiver Dance. Instead, we saw the impact of that in Game 2, even though it wasn't able to close it out. But with Rage Powder had been threatened there, it's a very different turn where Iron Hands feels much safer on the field. But without it, all Volcarona can do is Flamethrower the Chien Pao down to 1 HP. That said, both of these Pokemon very low in health now. Miraidon can use the Terrestrialization to make itself more safe on the field and then go out on the offense against either of them. Dazzling Gleam could maybe even get the KO on both. You have to worry about the threat of Wide Guard, but otherwise an electric move into either target should be a KO. And Volcarona, again, might just start getting ignored. Got ignored for a double target on the last turn, and now you have a Miraidon in front of you. That's what you have to pay attention to. But that just gives time for Volcarona to get Leftovers recovery, become more healthy, and possibly even get a Quiver Dance.
Both of the Pokemon on Ko's side have been significantly weakened since Miraidon was last on the field, so as you mentioned, unless there is a Wide Guard, Dazzling Gleam can do a lot in this turn. Terrestrialization apiece, however, this time it's going to be the Zamazenta on Ko's side, however, going for that Dragon Terrestrialization. This, again, doesn't look so good in the face of potential Dazzling Gleam, but we know that that Wide Guard is in the back pocket for Ko. It's going to be the Sucker Punch coming through, first of all, though, from this Miraidon, not doing a huge amount of damage, and Miraidon free to go for this Dazzling Gleam. This is going to be able to get the knockout on the Chien Pao. It's going to be able to get the knockout on the Zamazenta, and that is a fantastic swing of momentum for Justin Tang.
Yeah, just a devastating turn for Ko. Possibly thought he was threatening Wide Guard sufficiently enough that Dazzling Gleam wouldn't come out, but Justin has shown no fear of the Wide Guard throughout this set, just consistently going for the Dazzling Gleam anyway, once the higher impact, and then capitalizes on it further with a free Quiver Dance after the double KO. Just a devastating turn. Justin takes such a huge lead off of that, despite being the first one to give up a KO.
Yeah, I love the way Volcarona can capitalize on that as well. Kind of say, Miraidon, you can do the work, you can do the damage. I'm setting up to try and take this game 3. If you're Ko now, you're forced to bring in those last 2 remaining Pokemon, and depending on what they are, you can try and get some momentum around, but you still have to contend with the fact that this Volcarona is now set up. It's going to be dealing even more damage. At least you know Dazzling Gleam is coming through there.
You do know Dazzling Gleam is coming through, but without Wide Guard to stop it, it might actually not be that bad of a choice. Terrestrialization has already been spent. You have to imagine that Miraidon is one of those 2 Pokemon in the back for Ko, so a very vulnerable and good Dazzling Gleam target. That especially if it's Iron Hands alongside of it, then you're going to be perfectly fine locked into Dazzling Gleam. Meanwhile, Ko's going to have to make some really difficult decisions about where to target, because Dazzling Gleam doesn't look as strong for him with a Volcarona setting up, and then you have to choose whether Electro Drift is going into Volcarona or Miraidon, and this is kind of what Volcarona is accomplishing here. If you ignore it, it's going to become a problem. Let's not get too far of ourselves. Let's see what Ko actually has here and what that situation is going to be.
Well, it's going to be the Iron Hands and the Miraidon. So again, Hadron Engine on the field, that's going to be boosting up some of Miraidon's attacks. Quark Drive as well, going to be helping out the Iron Hands with its attack. Now, Iron Hands in a position where it can always go for that fake out as well, try and slow things down for a turn.
I think this is going to be a really interesting targeting decision. So Iron Hands probably wants to fake out Miraidon because you don't want a Dazzling Gleam to come out, but you have to be tempted to do something else on the turn, maybe fake out the Volcarona. Meanwhile, the Volcarona should move before the Miraidon on the other side with 1 boost, but even if it Quiver Dances again and get a 2nd boost, I'm not sure that it will be able to take an Electro Drift after the damage that we saw in Game 2. So, and if you just go for a Flamethrower, neither of these targets are very vulnerable to it. We saw the damage into Fairy, Miraidon in the previous game, not that much. The Assault Vest on the other side, and so, a fake out into Miraidon and an Electro Drift into Volcarona seems very strong, but there's protect options, there's switch options, and Justin can just flip this on its head, because if he can ever get back to the position to get a Dazzling Gleam into these 2 Pokemon, it's going to be devastating.
I think that's the beauty of having 3 remaining Pokemon here. Justin does have that flexibility to bring the Miraidon out. The fake out was actually going down into the Volcarona, so it's going to flinch and not be able to move in this particular turn, but Electro Drift has been the move locked in by Ko's Miraidon. It's going to find its mark down onto the Zamazenta, take it down to 2 hit points remaining. So close. Zamazenta is able to make it in, only just a little bit unscathed in that situation. But going forward, you know, you've got that Miraidon in the back. Like you mentioned, Dazzling Gleam can come through, but at least you have the utility to try and do something with Zamazenta in this turn.
Right, Ko gets the better out of all of this turn, manages to stop the Volcarona from getting set up, probably gets pretty valuable damage into it that makes sure it's vulnerable to Electro Drift in the future, and doesn't have to give up a Dazzling Gleam in the process. Gave up another big risk that Dazzling Gleam could have just come out in that position if, you know, if Justin's Miraidon moved first. Of course, if the Electro Drift had just come out, it might have just been a KO, but Justin, Ko knows that there's really safe Electro Drift damage into the slot that's either going to be a Zamazenta or a Miraidon, and so gets a ton of damage into the Zamazenta that probably won't be able to accomplish much now. Just protects through this turn, but is going to be slower than Miraidon and way too low health to take any attacks.
Yep, Zamazenta just going to sit pretty on the field, allowing this Volcarona to go for the Struggle Bug. It's not a huge amount of damage, but the critical thing is lowering the special attack of that opposing Miraidon, so it's a little bit less of a threat when the Miraidon on Justin's side is able to come back in. It's locked into Electro Drift, but it's going to be doing no damage this turn thanks to the Protect on that Zamazenta, and actually no damage for either electric type here. Zamazenta doing a really wise Protect on Justin's side.
A very interesting double target from Ko's side, maybe wanting to catch the Miraidon coming back in that slot and get the KO, but ends up paying a really high cost for it because doesn't get the KO, doesn't make any progress on that turn, and with Quark Drive expiring on this turn has even less damage threat into Volcarona. Maybe means the Struggle Bug would stop that KO, and probably still though has to target into Zamazenta anyway because you can't allow a body press out. Meanwhile, Volcarona is still accomplishing the same thing it has been throughout this match. When it's ignored, it's doing something valuable.
And that Hadron engine is deactivated as well. Volcarona, I think, going for the Protect here, just making sure that it cannot take any unnecessary damage in the Electro Drift. This time, we'll find its mark into the 2 HP Zamazenta. It's going to be more than enough to remove it from play. The interesting thing now is Justin will be forced to bring that Miraidon back in and set up that Electric Train once again. That will also benefit both of Ko's Pokemon that are once again just going for Wild Charge, Electro Drift, trying to get the damage on the board. But now Justin down to the last 2 remaining. You've got this Volcarona. It's using the Protect to get a little bit more HP back with the leftovers as well. But I think all eyes are going to be on the Miraidon, whether it is going to be able to close this up for Justin.
I have to imagine the Miraidon is going to get its Dazzling Gleam off. Struggle Bug should mean that at -2 special attack, the Miraidon on the other side isn't actually threatening a KO with Electro Drift into Miraidon, and for that to even stop a Dazzling Gleam, it would have to be faster than the Miraidon on Justin's side. If the question then is if Dazzling Gleam goes off, is that enough damage to close out the game? With Struggle Bug plus Dazzling Gleam, it should just KO the Miraidon on Ko's side. That leaves Iron Hands by itself. I don't think Iron Hands can do that. Justin doesn't even think he needs the Struggle Bug, just goes for the Flamethrower, gets a bunch of damage, finally gets the burn into Iron Hands, and looks like he's pretty far ahead in this as that Dazzling Gleam does come out.
Volcarona, once again, the superstar of the show, able to get damage on the board, get the burn, enable the cleanup from this Miraidon. Justin Tang is able to get the closure he wanted in this match and is victorious over Ko in this final round of Swiss, day 1 of NAIC.
Bounces back from a game 2 where he lost his own Zamazenta to a devastating body press critical hit, and then just pilots a bunch of delicate situations, very volatile situations quite well. Gets that turn 1 very right. Gets a Volt Switch into the Zamazenta for a ton of damage just to get Volcarona out on the field to take the body press instead. The thing on his team that does the best job of taking that body press. We talked between games about how